Good afternoon and welcome to Desh Bangla Live with Tania, Amir. I have today in the studio with me Mr. Barry Gardner, Labour MP, Brent West. Welcome.
It's always a pleasure to be here with MATV.
Thank you. Recently, the UK International Development Minister, Jenny Chapman, was in Bangladesh and she called on the Chief Advisor, Dr. Yunus. And there was discussion on three issues. One was elections, inclusive election. And that is what was discussed. During the discussion, Dr. Yunus did say that Awami League, which commands about 38 to 40% of the voters, that's a banned organization and hence will not take part in election. Yet the discussion was to have an inclusive election. So without participation of 40% of the voters where they can put their, cast their vote to their chosen party, how can there be an inclusive election?
Well, I think you've stated the obvious very well. And I've no doubt that that's why Jenny made the point about the need for inclusivity when she went to Bangladesh. Look, the previous government, the Awami League government, was in effect overthrown. I know that Sheikh Hasina resigned, the 5th of August last year she resigned from her post, but it was in the face of overwhelming opposition from the public that had taken to the streets. It is clear that although there was that overwhelming opposition, there are still people who would be wanting the return of the Awami League, and there should be a free and fair election. Now, to say that we will conduct elections, but we won't allow the main opposition party to take part in those elections, hardly respects that principle of free and fair elections and democratic accountability. So I think there are real issues, and I understand the difficulties. This is a government that was effectively thrown out on its ear, and no doubt is not popular with the majority of the people. But in a democracy, people have to be allowed to make their case to the public.
Yes. The mob in the streets, there are allegations that there were possibly foreign hands. There are allegations of even President Trump, when he took office, the US aid was dismantled across the world. The NDI and Tulsi Gabbard recently said that the US is not going to be involved in regime change, and we've seen similar incidents in Nepal and in Sri Lanka. So there seems to be a pattern. So to what extent the present government, which is unelected, or the popular uprising that you're saying was spontaneous, or to what extent it was engineered? Because Dr. Yunus, when he went to US, he admitted that it was meticulously designed. So that is something that people in Bangladesh are yet to grappling with. So
look, I have no knowledge of who or what may have been behind the regime change. Certainly there were problems with the previous government. I don't think we should try and minimize those or overlook them. And you will know that there are now suggestions of corruption that are being investigated and prosecuted. But if there is any foreign interference in domestic politics, and we do see it. We've seen it with Russian interference, we've seen it with American interference in the past, in different countries. Otherwise, it wouldn't be necessary to say we're not going to do it anymore, would it?
Exactly. Exactly.
So one can always surmise that there is external pressure, external aid to the party that whoever it is wants to come to power. But these are things that any democratic country, both the UK and India, must condemn in the strongest terms.
Absolutely. And as you rightly say, there's no substitute for good governance. Yeah. So that's something that one needs to cultivate no matter what. Now, in order for there to be an election, which Dr. Yunus has promised first week of February, before the...
yes, time's getting short for that, is it not?
Exactly so. So responsibility has to be given to the Election Commission to start preparing. Yeah. And they need at least 3 months. Does it not look as if we have passed the timeline?
Well, look, I don't know what the law in Bangladesh says about the timing and the notice that needs to be given to the Electoral Commission. But certainly, if an election is to be conducted responsibly, it's clear that the Electoral Commission and all the agencies that are involved in preparing ballot papers, in putting out due notice, in ensuring that you have the complete list of those who are able to participate in the election legally and those who are not. It's really important that that preparatory work is able to take place. And Ramadan will be coming up, so the time scale is really truncated now, I would say. It may still be possible to do this in an orderly fashion, but I think it's getting very difficult to see how that would take place.
So would you say the sincerity, is it visible that Dr. Yunus, the promise that he has made for first week of February.
You're trying to put words in my mouth.
No, not at all. It's the last thing I'd want to do.
Tania, look, I am not going to accuse anyone of insincerity. What I will say is that practical government puts things in place in good time. And that does not seem yet to have happened in Bangladesh.
Yes, so we are cutting it very, very
fine indeed.
Yes. Yeah. So, and the other problem is that there's so much illegal arms that seems to have come into Bangladesh. There are quote-unquote vigilantes, militia groups, and on top of that, one of the advisor who is responsible for youth is training our young people with firearms, which is something only the official legitimate police and the army is entitled to do. And he is justifying it, saying, well, it's sort of martial arts, self-defense training. That is also causing concern. What would be...
I think it's of huge concern.
Yes.
Let's be clear. When a government falls into the sort of chaos that we saw last year, then all sorts of groups and power struggles then take place. There will be the opposition party, which of course is now controlling the country, but there will be different factions, each of which wishes to assert itself over the other. And of course it's always possible that they fall prey to more militant forces. So I think it is deeply concerning that there isn't sufficient control of armaments. The idea that anyone other than the military in that country has a monopoly, should have a monopoly on the control of arms. That's ultimately what all governments state. They say that they are the only legitimate enforcer. So when you have militias setting up, when you have these people who are securing armaments for themselves and training people to their command, that actually undermines the whole stability of the state, because the state's claim, that is what a state is, the state's claim is that they have the monopoly on the use of force within a given area to enforce law and order.
Correct. We have also seen, which is very new, flags of ISIS being flown, black flags and so on, in public gatherings and meetings. And although they're saying that these are mob violence, but then, as you rightly say, is it not the responsibility of government to be able to not encourage the mob, but to control that?
Yes. Look, I'm deeply concerned, and I alluded to it a moment ago when I said that countries where governments fall into chaos, more militant forces can then arise, and you're giving specific examples of where this may be happening. I think it's not only those in Bangladesh that should be concerned about this. I think it is everyone that should be concerned about this. We've seen before what happens when countries give succor to terrorist groups, when they allow training camps in their own country for terrorist groups. They then export that terror. Sometimes that terror is exercised within their own country. But the last thing we need is more ability for what are, in most democracies, banned organizations to be allowed to take root in Bangladesh. I think that would be deeply against all common sense in terms of the geopolitics of the region.
Exactly. ISIS or Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is also banned in the UK, we are seeing openly such flags being flown and demonstrations, but there seems to be an impunity. So
well,
that is not
I don't know
task.
whether Jenny Chapman raised that when she was in Bangladesh with government ministers there, but it's certainly something that I think should have been on the agenda, and it's something that we should perhaps be offering any help that we can give to ensure that those groups do not gain strength and take root.
Absolutely. And the first casualties whenever there's Islamist or extremist are women, and of course minority groups. And we are beginning to see that manifest. So shrines, churches, Hindu shrines, Muslim Sufis.
Look, I know there have been attacks on Christian communities and Hindu communities in Bangladesh
and the
since
Sufis.
then. Yes, and the Sufis.
And the Muslim Sufis.
So it is an intolerance of anyone who disagrees in whatever way. But I think what you say about women and girls is particularly important. So often these extreme Islamic positions, they seek to control women's fertility and sexuality as the most vital part of their social control. And let me say, as if I look back on Christian history, our church did just the same in history. They sought to control women. Now, it is deeply concerning that women's sport is being undermined, because from there you begin to say, well, okay, today it's women's sport. Tomorrow, perhaps it's women's education. Then perhaps it's women in the workplace. And you see the way in which actually that exercise of social control, which we've seen in places like Afghanistan, then takes root, takes hold of society and represses and oppresses women.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry, for being so candid on my show. I really appreciate that. Your minister, Jenny Chapman, of course, did make a commitment to the women and girls of the Rohingya communities. These are a group, for our viewers, are refugees who have taken
Myanmar, yes.
from Myanmar, who have taken shelter in Bangladesh. Yeah. But was it not a lost opportunity for the minister not to take up the issue of the women and girls in Bangladesh? As you pointed out, that girls' football was banned. Women are now being told that their work hours should be reduced. In certain areas, fatwas have been given that women cannot sell their products in the village bazaars. Now, what is very, very surprising, Dr. Yunus, who actually obtained the Nobel Prize partially, and partially it was given to his organization, which espoused the cause of rural women. Now, the silence of Dr. Yunus when this sort of fatwas are given is painful. It's so loud. The silence is extremely loud. So this is already beginning to manifest. And this is a serious concern. And while we welcome Jenny Chapman's commitment to the Rohingya girls and women, is it not a lost opportunity not to stand for the women of Bangladesh?
I think what you've said is exactly right. It was perhaps a missed opportunity. And I don't know whether in private certain things were said or not. I'm not party to the discussions that they had. But I would hope that they made very clear to Mr. Yunus and to the government in Bangladesh that any repression of women and girls was deeply unacceptable to this country and that consequences should follow from it. Because, I look at our relations with other countries that we are giving aid to, and on the one hand you can say, well, if you stopped giving aid, then the women and the girls would be the first to suffer from it. But to be supporting regimes who are oppressing the women in their own country is equally paradoxical.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to go for a break. So to our audience, stay with us, a short break, and we'll return shortly. Thank you.
No drama, no exaggeration, just the truth. A complete news bulletin. MATV brings you Darshan News at 7 a.m., 11:30 a.m., 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. News the way it should be.
जामवंत के बचन सुहाए,
सुने हनुमंत हृदय अति भाए।
कब लगी मोहि परखे हु तुम भाई,
सही दुख कंद मूल फल
सियावर रामचंद्र पद जय शरण, जय जय सिया राम शंकर हरि ओम। दास तेरे की बेनती रिद कर परगास, दास तेरे की बेनती रिद कर परगास, दास तेरे की बेनती रिद कर परगास।
हजारों लोग हर रोज सुबह से रात तक कभी न कभी MATV जरूर देखते हैं. They might be your future customers, but you have to tell them about your products and services. Let's grow your business with MATV. Advertise, Promote and market your product and services on MATV. Call MATV Sales on 07970 337036 or 0208 795 0026.
প্রিয় দর্শক শ্রোতা, আপনাদেরকে আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি দেশ বাংলার উইথ তানিয়া আমির লাইভ। আমার সাথে অতিথিরা থাকবেন পৃথিবীর বিভিন্ন প্রান্ত থেকে, যারা দক্ষিণ এশিয়া নিয়ে চলমান পরিস্থিতি নিয়ে আলোচনা করবেন, বিশেষ করে বাংলাদেশ। তার সাথে থাকবে আরও অনেক চমক। তাই আপনারা এমএটিভি দেখবেন, your channel of choice.
Okay, welcome back. Barry, we were talking about the minority communities and women and girls who are the first victims of radicalization. Now, this is something that we were talking about, the impunity the government is given to these extremist groups, not taking any action against them. But now we are going to talk about an incident where the government has passed legislation changing the policy to appoint music teachers and physical education teachers and replacing them with clergies who will give religious education to children and young adolescents. So this has caused a lot of consternation, and the day when your minister was sitting with our chief advisor, there were demonstrations at the universities, this cancellation of this post for teachers, and we had incidents where female dance teachers were abused and tortured, saying that you cannot dance, this is not allowed, this is not permitted, in their extremist version of religion. And again, these are...
But look, the key point that you've made here is that this is not just some people objecting to music and dance teachers and education. You said there was legislation
Correct.
that had been passed.
That's right.
That is deeply concerning, deeply worrying, because it means that the government and the organs of government are captured by that ideology. And that is really worrying, because it looks then as if Bangladesh is turning into a fundamentalist Islamist state. And that would be a catastrophe. We've seen what happens in other such countries, and I think, yes, it begins with women. Yes, it begins with clamping down on music and dance and culture in general. But it goes right to the heart of education, because fundamentally, those fundamentalist teachers do not want an educated population.
Correct.
They want people that they can control. And this is all about control. So when the state is then passing legislation that facilitates that, that's when we should all be very, very worried indeed.
Absolutely. Now, the face of Dr. Yunus, who's heading the government, is a very acceptable face to a lot of us, including the West. Yet, the legislation and the policy seems to be that he's riding on the radical forces to remain in power. And we have already discussed how the possibility of elections is cutting it so thin, so whether at all we will have elections with so much vigilante and illegal arms that is in the country. So it is indeed very worrisome. And coupled with that, recently, when the demand is made by teachers to remove that, teachers are being persecuted and the impunity is being given to the so-called mob. So there's no lawful action and the monopoly of the state power is not being
I think
used.
you've got to be careful there, because if a law is being passed, the mob then has the backing of the law.
Yes.
And that's why it is so egregious that this is taking place. But I want to come back to what you were saying about Dr. Yunus, because you're right. He has a track record of doing some wonderful work. He received, he and his organisation received the Nobel Peace Prize because of the work that they did empowering women. And I suspect that when he was asked to be the interim political advisor or head of the interim state, that is a very precarious position to be in, because clearly you are accepting that the previous government has to be replaced, which I think was clear. But what you're also doing is you're then at the mercy of what you're calling the mob, but the people who have overthrown it. And I suspect he finds himself in a very uncomfortable position trying to navigate the political position, which is an unelected one that he happens to be in. Now, I'm not an apologist for Dr. Yunus, but I understand how politics can put somebody in a position where it seems that they are the independent arbitrator, only to become somebody who is either being buffeted from both sides and is trying to keep stability. But the key question is, does he have the power and authority to do that? Does he have the power and the authority to do what everyone would expect somebody with his track record of empowering women to do? It seems to me he does not. It seems to me that he is not in control, but that there are other forces behind him or underneath him who are actually now exercising the real power and changing the legislation in a way that suits a far more radical, anti-women, fundamentalist agenda.
Yes, that's certainly one way of looking at it, but at the same time, who is exercising the highest executive power to say that somehow he's not involved? Does it not take the responsibility away, do you think?
I'm not trying to take the responsibility away, because obviously in a situation like that, if you want to be guided by your principles and you feel that you are being manipulated by those around you, there's an easy solution. It's not easy, but there is a clear solution, and that is to resign and to say, I do not agree with what is now being put forward and carried out as the legislative programme of the government, which I am the titular head of. And it seems to me that it's a difficult position to be in if you are trying to ameliorate the situation, but actually feel that your authority is in paper only and not real. But that's the point, I think, where somebody in that position should say, I no longer have the power to do what I believe is right, and therefore I will step back.
Yes, I hear you. Now, the third issue that your minister talked about was lawful migration into the UK. And we will talk about it on two different perspectives. First, Dr. Yunus, because you've said that perhaps one should sympathise with him because...
I didn't use that word.
I mean, this is what I'm hearing.
Well, no, look, what I said is, if you are in disagreement with what is happening, and yet you occupy the role that in in its title at any rate, says that you are ultimately responsible for it.
Yes, I hear you.
Then you have a very clear choice to make. But I do understand that sometimes people in positions of supposed power do not actually wield that power.
Yeah.
It's others around them that do.
I hear you. Now, in terms of the safe and lawful migration, what we have is certain licensees, manpower export license, which is very lucrative, but that whole sector is infested with so much corruption, human trafficking, organ trafficking. Now, Dr. Yunus, whom we take up, in my word, not your word, a sympathetic stand, if we're to take, how would you explain that Dr. Yunus has himself awarded himself a license for manpower export? Would that not be a conflict of interest if you wanted to clean up that area? Because your minister clearly said lawful migration, and that is something was on the agenda and that was discussed. So to what degree there is that conflict of interest, and if so, should we be sympathetic towards him, or is it something he himself decided that he wants this lucrative license?
Look, these are in effect agencies that can bring people to other countries to do work there.
Yes.
So we've seen it in the Middle East when they were creating the stadium, the football stadium for the World Cup. Yes. And we know that a lot of labour was brought there, and a lot of human rights were abused in the process.
Correct.
I think. I have a simple rule here, and that is that if you are in a position of political authority and you have the power to award contracts, it is a clear conflict of interest to award that contract to yourself. There's no question about that. Particularly if there is economic gain to be made through that contract. There's a word for it, and it's called corruption.
So it's not just that, he has also awarded himself a digital wallet contract as well, and also passed a legislation to remove tax owed to the National Exchequer amounting to about 660 100 crores taka. So these are also facts, and facing Dr. Yunus in this, what you say is a precarious situation trying to navigate. So is there not gains that he is making while in office?
Well, look, the honest answer is I don't know, but it doesn't look very good, does it? If you're awarding yourself contracts, if you are apparently gaining financially from the ability that you have in terms of patronage or procurement, then these are things that are clearly unacceptable.
Sure. So, when we opened the discussion, we talked about linkages of the uprising with foreign powers. It's not necessarily only the West, but also the kind of radicalization that we are seeing, whether it's the Middle East or even Pakistan. There is speculation. And of course, now we have the Pakistan generals coming very often to Bangladesh, and a warship, a naval vessel, also anchored within our port in Chittagong.
Look, history tells us that the relationship that was originally there between what is now Bangladesh and Pakistan, it used to be East and West Pakistan. They used to be part of one country. And it was because of the Islamists and the opposition that the Awami League that were able to provide against those Islamists at the time of the separation, becoming Bangladesh, when it became absolutely apparent that Bangladesh itself was divided into factions, and the Awami League for many, many years managed to contain those tensions in the society. Now, they're no longer containing them. They're no longer contained. The Awami League has, it clearly became unacceptable what it was doing to the general population, and those who were perhaps being held in check by the Awami League and whose allegiance was elsewhere are now in the ascendant. So, of course, it's deeply troubling because the last thing that we want to see is a failed state in that part of Southeast Asia. The last thing we want to see is the sort of terrorist training camps that we've seen for decades in Pakistan, exporting terror around the world, and the way in which that more fundamentalist form of Islam has been able to take root. So, anyone who has even the preliminary understanding of history in the region that I have, and I don't claim any great understanding of it, but they will know that, this is a tension that has never quite gone away. Even though the Awami League were able to keep it in check, it has always been under the surface there, and unfortunately it seems to be now resurfacing, and let's hope it's not out of control.
Again, thank you for sharing that, Barry. That's very, very insightful. And
I claim no great insight into the history and politics, but I know the fundamentals.
No, it's absolutely, you've put your finger on the nail. And the birth of a republic, Bangladesh is born as a republic. So we moved away from a theocracy. In Pakistan, it's an Islamic republic, whereas Bangladesh is a People's Republic of Bangladesh. So we made a 180-degree turn, and this was based on our culture and our language and the women in particular. Our mothers, our aunts, if one went to the Muktijudha Museum, which has now been destroyed, we would see that the so-called mob, which is given impunity by the government, by the way, we would see how the women came out because we wanted equality of all people, including women, Hindus, Muslim, Christians, Buddhist, Baus, the Sufis. So it didn't matter what was your religion, what you're professing. We were Bengali.
Yes.
So under the banner of being Bengali, we included, it's very inclusive. And people also who are not Bengali, the tribals, the ethnic minorities who speak a different language, the Bengali culture was very inclusive.
Yes.
Whereas the Pakistani puritanic, purist Islamist were that no, you have to be like this and you have to speak Urdu and not Bengali. So this is a gripe. I don't know if Pakistan has overcome, particularly given the fact that in 1971, we Bangladeshis did not have a standing army. So the freedom fighters were mostly women, peasants, and students. And there was a Pakistan army which unleashed a genocide upon the people of Bangladesh because there was an election, and through the election, Bangladesh, the Bengalis, we elected our representatives, and all the Pakistanis had to do, the military junta, was to hand over power to the elected representatives. Instead of doing that, they unleashed a genocide upon the unarmed civilian. So there is a tendency to commit not just physical genocide that they did, but also the cultural genocide. Yes. And this cultural genocide, perhaps, is what is being played out to a degree at the moment. And that is something how is our development partners, especially the historical linkages that we have with the UK, how is the UK viewing this? And
Well,
what, if any, UK can do to help and support the people of Bangladesh who are very proud about their cultural heritage. So sites of cultural heritage has been destroyed, monuments and buildings. And Dr. Yunus, of course, said himself that he's pushing a reset button with history. So what has happened in 2024 starts afresh. So everything that happened, all the achievements of the people of Bangladesh and the struggle of the Bengali people for their liberty is to be wiped out. And this is a cry, a very loud cry I hear from people from Bangladesh. Do you hear that? Can you respond to that?
I believe that any people that destroys its cultural heritage is on a very dark path. Destroying museums, banning your musical heritage, stopping dance. You know, people may say, well, why is dance important? Why is music important? Because we're human. These are the things that make us human.
Of course.
And destroying a museum that houses your nation's history, your people's culture for hundreds of years is simply vandalism. And wherever we see that, it's a denial of history, and it's a failure to understand just how a people evolves. So I think it's deeply, deeply troubling. It's troubling, of course, at a political level, but it's troubling at a human level as well. This is about increasingly the way in which in the world I feel we no longer try and see ourselves as part of a wider community. We try and identify ourselves more and more as an isolated, insisting on the differences that we have with other people, rather than recognizing that which we have in common. And it's a feature of politics, not just in Bangladesh, it's a feature of politics, I think, across the world now. And it's one of the most depressing aspects of political life.
Thank you. And Dr. Yunus, when he was in New York before the UN meetings, there was no coercion as such. He was laughing and joking, and he said we need to push the reset button. So the last question is that, given that we've discussed all the various issues, and whether Dr. Yunus is navigating various forces, and given the military might or the muscle power is strong with the radicals, is it easy for him to give in to that, as opposed to the cultural, linguistic, musical voices of the people? So,
look, the answer is, the honest answer is, I don't know what Dr. Yunus's position is. But I do know that those who have the actual power, those who have the power to enforce their will rather than simply to assert it, can make political life extremely difficult. I don't know whether he does support the radical Islamist tendency, or whether he is simply trying to ameliorate it, or whether he feels trapped by it, or whether he believes it's absolutely the right thing to do. The answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that the more and more that tendency becomes dominant, the more we see fundamentalism taking hold of governments and countries, the more conflict we're likely to have in this world, and the more dangerous it becomes, not just for women and girls in those countries, but for people everywhere. And that's why it's so important that we do have education. That's why it's so important that we assert the importance of cultural life. And that is perhaps something that we should be doing much more vocally than we are.
Thank you, Barry. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I just wish we had more time, but we're totally out of time. And would you promise to come back?
Of course, always happy.
Right.
As I said at the beginning, always happy to be here with MATV.
All right, so that's all for today. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have another guest. And on behalf of my audience, I'd like to thank you again. Jai Bangla.
Jai Bangla.